Hello, everyone. When Bishop Noel Jones stepped onto the stage and uttered the words, "I divorced," or rather, when he addressed the rumors, the misunderstandings, and the flood of speculation surrounding his marriage, his past relationships, and the emotional truths he had kept buried for years, fans, followers, and critics alike were stunned because while he wasn't confessing to a legal divorce, he was admitting to something far more vulnerable and raw. That long before he finally married his longtime partner Loretta, he had emotionally divorced himself from intimacy, commitment, and vulnerability, building walls so high that even the people closest to him could barely reach over them. And in this new confession, he revealed the lifetime of pressure, trauma, spiritual responsibility, and emotional exhaustion that drove him to push love away until he almost lost it forever. And as he began unpacking the decades of rumors about breakups, cold feet, avoided proposals, and the tension that played out publicly on preachers of LA, Noel opened up in a way viewers had never seen, explaining that for years he lived in a state of quiet internal conflict, torn between the demands of ministry and the fear that marriage would add a weight he didn't believe he could carry, admitting that he had divorced himself from the idea of normal love because he convinced himself the church needed him more than any partner ever could. A mindset he now sees as rooted deeply in childhood wounds, pastoral expectations, and a lifestyle that conditioned him to keep every human need at arm's length. And he spoke about the criticism he endured for stringing a woman along for over 2 decades, the backlash from viewers who watched Loretta wait for a proposal that never came, and how each accusation, each rumor, each blog headline chipped away at him until he no longer recognized the man behind the pulpit, the man whose public persona overshadowed his private fears. And as Jones delivered his confession, he discussed the loneliness that followed him even while leading one of the most influential churches in the country, describing the emptiness that comes from being surrounded by thousands, yet feeling emotionally isolated, pressured, and spiritually drained, revealing that he had spent years pouring into everyone else while starving himself emotionally, a pattern that eventually left him wrestling with the terrifying realization that he was becoming a man incapable of receiving love even when it stood right in front of him. And then came the moment that shook his audience. Noel admitted that he had, in many ways, divorced not a woman but himself, his younger dreams, his emotional well-being, his belief in companionship, replacing all of it with duty, image, and the constant illusion that spiritual leadership demanded sacrifice at the cost of happiness, and that the decades-long delay in marrying Loretta was not about her, but about his own internal fracture, one he had been too ashamed to confront. And he revealed that as he aged, especially after suffering health scares and the loss of close friends, he realized that independence had become a prison, that the walls he built to protect himself had become cages, and that for the first time in his life, he feared growing old alone, not because of the absence of people around him, but because of the absence of true emotional partnership, a revelation that pushed him to re-examine everything he believed about love, ministry, masculinity, and vulnerability. And when Noel finally proposed to Loretta in 2022, he now admits that it was the moment he undid the divorce. The moment he reconciled with the part of himself he had abandoned decades earlier. The moment he accepted that partnership was not weakness but healing, and that his confession now, shocking breakdown of his internal journey, is meant to dismantle the myth that spiritual leaders are immune to loneliness, fear, trauma, or emotional wounds. And as he continued his confessional monologue, he addressed the critics who claimed the marriage was for publicity or pressure, revealing that the truth was far more heartbreaking. He had spent so much of his life giving every part of himself to ministry that he didn't know how to give himself to love, and the real tragedy was not delayed marriage, but the years of emotional exile he imposed on himself. An exile that taught him that being a bishop does not protect a man from human pain, relationship struggles, or the quiet, devastating feeling of disconnecting from one's own heart. And as Noel Jones closed his confession, his voice broke with a vulnerability audiences had never seen, explaining that the most painful divorce he ever experienced wasn't from a spouse, but from the version of himself that believed he didn't deserve love, a divorce that took decades to heal. And this revelation, raw, unfiltered, and deeply human, is what left the public stunned. Not because he ended a marriage, but because he finally told the truth about how deeply he had ended himself long before he ever found the courage to truly begin again. Thanks for watching.